GM, everyone, and welcome to the RWA Pod, your finger on the pulse for everything happening in the world of tokenized assets. I'm your host, Ray Buckton, the host of the RWA Pod, and I'm super stoked today to be joined by the founder and CEO of Brickken, Edwin. Edwin, how are we doing today?
Hey, Ray, thank you very much for having me. Actually, doing great. Almost the end of the year, Christmas and whatnot. So, hoping to have a great closure year. So, thanks for having me here.
Absolutely, man. It's a pleasure. Pleasure's all ours. And yeah, as we get closer to Christmas, I hope we all get a huge green candle under the tree, right? In terms of market sentiment, I know that's what we're all
Yes,
looking for.
please.
That's
Only thing I'm
definitely
asking Santa this year, just one green candle.
right. He didn't even let me sit on his lap. But if anything, hopefully he'll still bring me the gifts. We'll see what goes down there. But Edwin, I know, speaking of which, even regardless of the kind of candles that we get, assets are still being tokenized in mass. And I know the work you're doing at Brickken is foundational for that process. So, I'd love to start with kind of building that foundation for our listeners here who maybe are new to the topic and keep hearing things like RWA, tokenization. Can you explain in your own words, what is tokenizing a real world asset? What does that mean? And why do you think it's becoming so essential to what we're doing here at Web3?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of disparity because everybody came up with their own conclusion as to what is a real world asset. Kind of like this is not being like consensus. So on our end, what we decided to do is everything that is not on chain or existing fully in the blockchain, we call it real world asset. So it can be money, it can be equity, it can be bonds because it doesn't exist in the blockchain. Bitcoin natively, they already exist there. So that's not a real world asset. It's an on-chain asset. So I don't know if that definition will stick in, but for us, it kind of is the great way to establish what is a real world asset because suddenly everything became an RWA issue because everything is still outside the off-chain factor, right? So yeah, I think that definition for us makes
Absolutely. So far, the super minority of the world's assets exist on chain. And I joke with people, right? It's like I've yet to be shown a fake world asset. So real world assets are pretty much anything and everything. And that definition seems to be holding true. Everything from, as you were saying, real estate, treasury bonds, et cetera. It's all making its way on chain. I know Brickken was a very early adopter to this RWA movement, as we're calling it. Long before RWAs were in the headlines and a big trend, you all were working very diligently to lay the foundation and build the technology to bring assets on chain. So I would love if you could just walk us through briefly the original vision that sparked Brickken and how has this vision shifted from the early experimentation phases when you first started bringing assets on chain to now having hundreds of millions of dollars worth of tokenized assets and value now on chain?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a great question because we've been in the game for 5 years, which says a lot. And at the beginning, we started doing, or we wanted to engage in pure real estate crowdfunding. So we wanted to have real estate against investors and us being the crowdfunding platform. We even applied for the regulation here in Spain to become a crowdfunding platform, but it was too limited to what we wanted to do, which we always wanted to play with tokenization. So it was kind of like we're dipping our toes, but not fully. Kind of like we want to use blockchain, but not for what it was worth. So it was more like a ledger. So it was very much um, very top layer on what you can actually build. And then in 21, I believe we got a grant from the Spanish government where they gave us some money, were nice at the amount for us to develop fully the platform on chain. So that was the point where our MVP, we stopped creating and then we fully created what is our current app. So we went fully into creating something that we call now tokenization as a service, which allows companies to be able to digitize any kind of asset on their own. So that's kind of like what we wanted to provide facilitation to the tokenization. You don't have to rely on everybody. We have software that allows that to happen. Obviously, our vision completely pivoted from us being an intermediary between the asset and the investor to us providing the rails for the asset owner to get their own investor.
It's absolutely crucial. And then I think what you've outlined here, tokenization as a service, is, as we've seen recently, becoming more and more in vogue. The notion of bringing an asset on chain is on the surface and at a first glance seemingly easy. You just create a token and it represents an asset. But it's very much an iceberg on top of an iceberg in terms of things you need to consider from jurisdictional legal compliance to the actual management of the asset's life cycle. And then that's one of the biggest components there. And thus far, we've seen major names emerging in the space, Edwin, like, Ondos, Centrifuge, Polymesh is another one, and even traditional financial players like Brevin Howard, Van Eck, becoming very aligned with the ethos of bringing assets on chain. So I would love to double click on how you see Bricken's role within the tokenization landscape as it evolves. What distinct angle are you and the Bricken team taking that others aren't, especially when it comes to building, global retail-friendly tokenization ecosystems and applications?
Yeah, so many of the ones you said are asset owners. Even Ondo, right now they have something related as a service, but they are very good on the asset owner. They created kind of like the accessibility to T-bills on the on-chain, but they are the asset owner. And then Bankek and other ones are still asset owners. So they're the ones having access to the asset, tokenizing that access, and providing that opportunity to third parties, even retail or accredited, it doesn't matter. So our perspective is that Brickken is not an asset owner. I'm never tokenizing any single asset. I don't have ownership. I don't have access. I'm providing the software for the Ondos, the Bankers, the Franklins to be able to tokenize that journey. So they have a couple of possibility asset owners. Either they do it on their own, big pockets would, kind of like they like to develop their own tech or acquire tech, but other pockets will rely on, what is my leanest way to go to market, Bricken. So we provide that. And now we're talking with a lot of funds doing that. Kind of like, okay, we thought about developing, but we didn't understand the technology, the know-how. And when you create a product, it's about iterations. Kind of like Ricky has gone through 5-year learning process. So what we have now is after 5 years. So the newcomers whose really USP is the asset owner, the management, and not the tech, they might fall into the scope where they outsource something that they're not gonna like, they're not gonna be in stock. Because our USP, the only thing Bricken does here is reiterate, innovate on the tokenization layer. So that's why we're very good. I'm not gonna enter into the asset ownership game ever.
And that makes a lot of sense in my opinion. It's very much like the point of sale kind of payment software, right? These payment softwares, most of the time, they don't actually have the bank themselves. They have banking relationships, but they don't actually own the flow of the payments. They simply facilitate the
Absolutely.
technology to make it happen. And personally, I love the ability to just take a piece of plastic and poke it against something, and my commerce relationship is done. Everything is very smooth. And so what Bricken is doing in terms of facilitating the tokenization as a service and allowing assets to move on chain fluidly, I think really hits the nail on the head in terms of where we are in the life cycle of asset tokenization. And so for someone who's listening, Edwin, and maybe has heard of Bricken, or maybe they haven't even heard of Bricken, and they now know from a high level what Bricken does, can you walk us through at again a high level how I would engage with Bricken to bring my assets on chain? So if I'm a business or a creator and I have real estate or a portfolio and I want to tokenize this portfolio, how do I go about creating a business relationship with Bricken to then move these assets onto Web3 rails?
Yeah, so the funny thing about this is that this year we had the sole goal of creating one asset without Bricken's help, right? So we wanted to perform that a client goes to our website, registers, pays as any SaaS would, and start using that platform. All right. And that's basically what we have accomplished. You don't need to communicate to Britain. You can go to the website, register, pay, and start deploying assets. Obviously, we have customer service that we can help you because it's still, even though we make it the most friendly, leanest way, we're still talking about tokenization or digitization of financial instruments. So there's still a learning curve there. But to engage in our tokenization, really, we have performed a very nice role where you create the asset on chain through sort of a type form experience where we guide you question answer so you can deploy that asset. To create the offering, it's like, okay, I created this asset. Now I want to offer it to the third parties. I create that offering to building like what we call an investor portal, which is kind of like your standalone website where you offer information, the prospectus, white paper, whatever you want to do on the investment opportunity. And that becomes the portal of registration for investors. So investors jump into the website, they review all the information, and they can start deploying capital. Kind of like we eased that way of capital formation. And now in just in a few clicks, you have the whole funnel. And obviously, never worry about coding. We are abstracting wallets, blockchains, because in the end, our USP is obviously it's tokenization, but it's really not. If we want to break it, we're just helping in the capital formation, in the capital acquisition. Tokenization is that technology, but it's not our selling point. It's How easy can companies source capital? That's the real question we ask ourselves every day.
I absolutely love that. And then the focus on selling the outcome and the benefits rather than selling the thing itself is huge. Some people, let's say the very minority of people, buy a car because they think it looks nice and it's really cool and something they want to keep in their garage. It's more of a collector's item. Most people buy a vehicle because it gets them from point A to point B. It's the utility that people are looking for and the notion that you can plug and play and bring your assets on chain to run as well with the payment rails analogy. If someone who's a small business owner wants to set up with Stripe or Clover, they don't have to get on the phone and have 3 or 4 calls. They simply set up and they're done. So I love what the approach that you're taking with Brickken here, where it very much is a plug and play solution. I think that makes a ton of sense. And for someone like me, people who have listened to my content have probably heard me make the joke before. I think Ruby is a gemstone and Python is a snake. When you said no code, that speaks right to my heart, man. I don't want to have to do any plugins or anything like that. So it works perfect for me.
I was saying that joke. That's a very good one. That's a great way to explain that people don't care about the code. Like that's it. You don't use an app. You don't use Uber because they use Amazon Web Service. You use Uber because it gets you the car. Like that's it. People don't. We on the blockchain worry too much about. Oh yeah, I'm using Ethereum. Our clients are what too. A lot of people don't even know that Ethereum is a blockchain or even Bitcoin is a blockchain. And like the foundation is not there. So why do you want to bring some complexity for them to think? Oh, now I want this because then you go into having to explain everything. And when you use an app, nobody explains you how it works. You just click play. That's it.
Exactly. I don't think I've ever met anyone who turns up their nose and says, oh, you've used GoDaddy for your hosting service. I don't want to access your website. A very similar situation where, oh, you're using Solana. I'm an Ethereum kind of guy. It's very in vogue right now. But as we abstract away a lot of these steps and your average person who's not in our industry begins to utilize this technology for specifically asset tokenization, I agree wholeheartedly. They're not going to care too much where their assets land on the back end as long as everything works smoothly. And to that end, one of the biggest components that I see, and I'm sure you do as well, Edwin, in our industry, is the focus on compliance. Since we're in such early days of asset tokenization, many, if not all individuals who are bringing assets on chain, they should, are concerned about compliance standards. And Brickken recently co-authored 7943, also called the Universal RWA Interface Standard. And for those who aren't really deep into the Ethereum development landscape or the smart contract standards landscape, and I know we're going from abstraction to technical standards here, I would love to kind of bridge that gap and break down why that matters for these early days of tokenization. Now, what does EIP 7943 actually enable for builders and innovators when they walk through this very easy no-code process?
So I mean, in the end, kind of like it has to rely also on the analogy before. Kind of like an ERC is just a part of code, right? But it's not what we call the full stack. To be compliant, you cannot rely just on one fragmented silo. And I'm saying that silo because you have the ERC, you have the blockchain, the ERC, then you have the application, and then you may have off-chain. So it's kind of like the whole ecosystem is what makes you compliant, right? There was a thought that the 3643, which is kind of like an ERC, will make you compliant. That was a great marketing, but the problem is that some companies rely just on that to be compliant, and it's no, you need to rely on that, on how you handle the data. Are you KYCing? Are you whitelisting? Are you onboarding correctly? So it's a whole flow what makes you compliant. And the approach that we did is just to not pull all the compliance layer into a single line of code, but so to speak, but allow them to really maneuver that whole ecosystem. Kind of like adopt what best fits them without falling into one single way. I'm not telling you how to be compliant. I am giving you the tools for you to be compliant, but nobody knows how to best be compliant than you because you are in China, because you're in Australia, you're in the United States, because you're doing bonds, because you're doing real estate, you're doing commodities. So it's impossible to have an instance fit all because not a single jurisdiction the exact same, not a single instrument is the exact same. So we cannot believe that one standard will fit all. It's literally impossible.
Absolutely. And I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of I believe it's been called in some of the marketing communications as well, the Swiss Army knife of compliance standards. And I love that analogy because just as you said, different jurisdictions are going to use their comparative advantages differently. So a jurisdiction that's based very heavily in commodities extraction may have really preferable legal configurations and compliance standards for commodities trading in their jurisdiction, whereas in the United States, it may be much more stringent or more relaxed. So offering that functionality and optionality is huge depending on to whom you're selling, where your asset is based, et cetera. And I definitely feel that on a spiritual level as an American. Pretty much everything I touch that says RWA is like, hey, this is for you, unless you're a US citizen. Sorry, we're still working that out, which is fair. It's a stringent
Nice.
jurisdiction, but with some regulatory clarity. I think we're working towards a future there where I'll even be able to play in the RWA sandbox. And I'm curious as well, when we're talking about the compliance standards, bringing assets on chain, and with Brickken having been involved in the industry since 2017, I know you have some really phenomenal examples that you could pull from to kind of make it real and tangible for folks. And I'd love to do that to really illustrate kind of how the process works and what we're seeing on the ground. At Brickken, you guys have tokenized everything from healthcare revenue to gold-backed projects and everything in between. Can you share one recent tokenization example that really stood out to you? So what was the asset? How did the deal come together? And what did you learn about bringing these assets on chain when you went through this process?
Yeah, so I can elaborate a lot on that because suddenly we started learning a lot. And it's because our clients are the ones deciding how to use our technology because I'm not telling them what is the best asset, I don't even enter the business. And it sounds really bad, but I could even care less what they tokenize because I'm just worried about the software, right? But based on this, apparently I became an expert in gold. The other day I was talking with a family office on gold and I was handling the conversation as they would. And it's like, oh, so Brickken is an expert in gold. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, I didn't even know I knew all of this. And I was cracking up. And I was like, no, it's just that the clients tell us and we learn because we need that conversation to do. So we suddenly have a lot of knowledge on minerals, gold, and some random things. So I'm going to explain about the random thing about the client. So we had a client who came in from Chile and they had a fish factory, right? A fish factory and they wanted source funds because they wanted to grow a new tank or whatever. And I had no clue. Like for me, if you tell me I'm not going to invest in a fish factory. They have great APYs. They were offering like, I think like 18% or something. So it makes you think like there's always an investment appetite out there. Tokenization is a facilitator. It's not a new thing that, oh, I've tokenized, it becomes a more sexy for me to invest. I'm going to invest in the product that gives me the best returns and something that I know. So if I'm a real estate investor, I will always maintain my appetite in real estate investment. And if it's in a contract that I have to sign, or if it's in a token that I have to buy, what I'm worrying about is the APY, the promoter, the location, the valuation, and that's what is making my investment appetite. So what we learn in Bricking here is kind of like we're never gonna know everything. We can help them into modernizing the capital formation. And if that fish factory has appetite and already know their database was wants to amplify to other fish aficionado in Southeast Asia, then blockchain is a facilitator for that to happen. When you ask me like what do we have had so many random things that probably 99% out there I want to invest because I'm a traditional guy. I like to invest in two, three, and no risky assets. But somebody out there might say like, I love fish. I understand this because I come from I don't know, a town of fishermen, and I believe this is a great opportunity. Then it is a responsibility for the Chilean company to target those investors, not to transform an investor. They will not get the Bitcoiner because the Bitcoiner only invests in Bitcoin, but he should target. And that's kind of like where we are. We have had a lot of random investment opportunities, but on the end, we can enter and we always do the same. We wish them the best. We open them with a great service, a great software, and them understanding how now that digitization phase they're entering works in their benefit.
Absolutely love that. And that's an example that even with my experience at RWA World and having hundreds of conversations, I don't think I've ever come across a fish tokenizer yet. That's a
So,
really unique
yeah,
one. I love that. I have no basis for determining, and I have to do my dad joke here. If you see the APY that high, you may think it's fishy until you actually get under the hood and see what's happening there. But to your point, I think
that is
the
good.
We were talking about the geographies and different jurisdictions having comparative advantage. In your example, a gentleman who runs a fishing trawling company and his town is on the coast is going to have a much more intimate understanding of whether or not, hey, I understand fish. This APY is very conservative. They're running a great operation. I'm going to invest. And as you said, the capital formation is really the crux of the matter for asset tokenization. It's not about bringing your technology to your friend who operates a fishing trawling business and saying, hey, I have the best technology. They're going to understand the markets that they understand and delivering them opportunities that resonate with them and their investment appetite, and enabling that capital formation is absolutely huge. And one thing I'm really excited about as well, Edwin, is that in terms of the ability to take allocation to things that make sense, many Web3 investors and on-chain natives are looking for ways to get exposure to real-world asset infrastructure plays. And I know Brickken is one of the leading names in terms of providing this technology. And you all do have the BKN token, the native token for the Brickken ecosystem. So for those who are listening here, those in the audience who see Brickken and are excited by what they're hearing, can you walk us through a little bit about the BKN token itself? How does it tie into governance, rewards, platform growth, and why did you feel it important to create a native ecosystem token for the Brickken ecosystem?
Yeah, so when we started with the grant in 2021 and we want to put everything on the blockchain rails, for us it makes sense to have a utility token because it will allow us to be a sanction the fees and everything, right? Our evolution has also made our idea, yes, it's still for transaction, for platform fees and whatnot. We're even hiding that piece because even sometimes we're seeing that as a friction point. So now we even hide it. They pay for it, but they don't even know they pay for it. We do it in the back against the Uniswap and whatnot. But the important thing is now we're exploring it from the investor side of things. So investment pools, they have early access or some rewards straight from where they invested. So we try to trigger that kind of like still very protocol like utility token, but also now with what we really understand, kind of like community formation around the utility token. Right now, it's a little bit negative how the alts are doing because of how the market is performing. But if it relaunches, there has never been a better community gather than utility tokens. Kind of like, I think that was the climax of loyalty. So if you can penetrate again and tell companies that that's a great tool, then we can go back. And I still believe that the BKN that we have, and even our community is very positive on RWAs because we've been educated and being very solid. We want to explore new ways as to how we can become that loyalty gatherer towards the business that we need. But and we have an update coming up. I don't want to say too much because we're going to disclose doing smart contract chaining because we're part of the build program. But yeah, we rebranded some things on the BKN to give it more exposure. But again, trying to maintain that kind of like, yes, hidden protocol that the business doesn't friction, but then kind of like that loyalty that the community would like to pursue. So let's see if it works. We're gonna experiment new things, and from there, hopefully, get new utilities to keep up the path that we engaged in 2021.
I love it. And I think that's a great move as well. It gives Web3 investors the ability to take exposure to a defining name in the RWA ecosystem. And most importantly, I think what you hit on in terms of experimentation and innovation is core to everything that we're doing, not just in asset tokenization, but in Web3 in general. Many initiatives, they'll put out something that, hey, we're going to create a coin or a token, and it's going to do a certain definitive thing, and it's not necessarily tied to real world business activity. And if that thing does not work out, then the token itself has no value. Compare that to what you're doing here with Brickken and taking real world tangible assets and bringing them on chain and creating better capital formation and real world business value. Having the ecosystem token tied to that, at least in my opinion, as someone who's a huge RWA nerd, I think it makes a lot more sense than fundamental just speculation through and through. There's real world capital formation benefits that are accruing, to users of the Brickken platform. And as that passes through the BKN token, no matter what configuration it takes, as long as it's accreting that value, there's a beautiful flywheel. And we recently launched the RWA Pod, soon to be called the RWA Vault, which is a way for listeners here today to deposit USDC one time and earn from a basket of RWA tokens. This includes the BKN token, excitingly. And so from your perspective, Edwin, how do programs like this that facilitate distribution and perhaps even more importantly, education about RWA, how does this help expand the ecosystem for asset tokenization as a whole? So maybe framed another way, how do you view community community and education as pillars? How important are they for asset tokenization and kind of where we find ourselves in the life cycle of this technology?
Yeah, so I think for the past couple of years, we've been educating more on the B2B side, and I'm talking about general, right? All companies on the tokenization, whatever. Because we're B2B people. We're selling a service or trying to do something with another business. So the education was always about how the companies can benefit. Companies of any kind, funds, retail, whatever it means, doesn't matter. Now, I believe that we need initiatives that have to educate the retail investor to provide them with this kind of opportunities, saying, like real world assets, steady income, less risky. Everything is risky, nothing is zero risk, but let's say way less risky than crypto markets. Maybe less risky than Nasdaq because if you find some opportunity which is value certified and whatnot, less risky. So I think it is initiatives like this that is going to promote the RWA, not from a utility, not like the BKN or the ONDO, because we have utility token, but kind of like the service or the product that is being offered through us. So people should invest in T-bills. By all means, 4.5% on the biggest company in the world, it's very good. Like you don't get that in the bank. Then us with some like the fish factory, 18%, that's ridiculous high. But we tend to forget that the retail investor in our sector, the crypto markets, were looking for 100x returns because it happened in a couple of past bull runs. We don't know if that's going to happen again, hopefully. But people should educate and be more mature, kind of like, hey, if I have 1,000 euros here and I'm going to make it up, 150 euros at the end of the year, profit is profit. Instead of thinking, oh, I'm going to put 1,000, thinking I'm going to make 1,000,000, and then tomorrow you like have 0.50 and it's like, oh, I lost all my money. We need to be more mature. So I do believe that now we have to educate the retail. So through the pod, it's a great way because you're targeting those people and educating them and saying, hey, real world assets has a lot of things, and there's a thing, and there's a reason why now it's exploding and becoming and solidifying as one of the best verticals, or for me, it's going to be the most best, it's the best performance vertical for blockchain because blockchain is a ledger. Literally, it was made for fintech, like transactions on chain, full time availability. Like blockchain is a fintech. So I think RWA is going to be the best performance vertical for blockchain without a doubt.
I definitely echo that sentiment 100%. I like to say that our industry is a bit of a South Park economy, right? It's like, hey, I'm going to put this in a leveraged perpetual futures, delta neutral, and it's gone. I now have no more money. Is kind of the approach. And unfortunately, a 10,000% gain is bit of a challenge to come by. And I love to use the example of Warren Buffett as well. Warren Buffett is one of the largest holders of treasuries in the world, and he did not get there by, betting on GameStop and AMC when they were ripping. He did this over decades and decades of sustainable business practices that, just as you were explaining, Edwin, had a nice, solid APY, sometimes even high single digits year over year. But this compounded sustainably over a number of decades to make Warren Buffett, well, Warren Buffett. He's kind of a well-known guy. And with that said, he bets on the things that are tried and true. And that really gets to the heart of my next question here for you, Edwin, which is the tokenization conversation that often comes from two different angles. We have the institutional infrastructure side, just as you were conveying. Blockchain is a technology, and it's a financial technology at that. And that's something that institutions are beginning to become familiar with and really embrace. But we also have the decentralized financial side, unicorn-based backwards hat, Vitalik kind of dancing around on stage that makes traditional finance kind of, scratch their beers a little bit. But with these two worlds being so distinct from one another, do you see a potential future where these worlds, these traditional financial institutions and decentralized financial applications and ecosystems begin to work together, whether that's through liquidity pools, tokenization standards, or otherwise?
Yeah. So I without a single doubt, I think we're going to enter into more of a hybrid model until it becomes just Fi. Kind of like right now, we're trying to understand how TradFi meets DeFi. It's very, it's not opposing things, Polars. It's just that opposing even investment thesis. Like some people like to invest in liquidity pools because they understand that being an LP in a pool can get 1% of the transaction and understand it. Other people would like to invest in a bond. But the important thing is that right now, a lot of effort is being to combine those two juggernauts, right? Even TradFi is way bigger, but DeFi has proven its point. Kind of like even a lot of people are taking into consideration that decentralized finance, being your own bank or your own lender, can provide a new possibility for you to gain income, right? So I think the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years is going to be still being a TradFi versus DeFi until it becomes TradFi slash DeFi until it becomes Fi, because it's just another possibility and people will rather have different possibilities into one application, but it's like, okay, I want to invest into this, which is less risky because it's considered formally TradFi than being here, which is an LP. But the important thing is that now it just became a new possibility. So we shouldn't alienate people into what is what, because if you talk to a TradFi and you tell them it's TradFi, some people is like, why are you calling us TradFi? And then like, we're so used to that term. But and then the DeFi, they know everything. It's like, yeah, DeFi, traffic. But the other day with that conversation, I was talking to it's like, oh, it's so good to have TradFi people here. And he looked at me, it's like, what is TradFi? I was like, traditional finance. I was like, but I don't get it. And I was like, you're completely right. I don't know why I alienated you calling you TradFi because you're the financial of every day. So I think the blend needs to happen and the alienation needs to be off. And I think the both worlds will combine, and that's going to be a great moment for absolutely everyone.
Absolutely. I fully agree there. And it's a bit like saying that when I save something to my desktop, it's like saying, oh, you're using trad storage. It's like, well, what do you mean? Oh, you're not saving it to the cloud. You're using, trad storage. And it's like, well, this is just how I save files to my desktop. And it seems like that's what most people are doing. Where am I going wrong here? And I think that's the real decision point is it can make traditional financial incumbents feel like they're missing something or that they're in the wrong. And definitely here in DeFi, we've seen situations where to use a phrase, the baby was thrown out with the bathwater in terms of risk and compliance, right? Most folk here in Web3, you say, hey, looking for a X even, you're really high up on the risk curve. And they say, well, what's a risk curve? I haven't heard of that before. And lo and behold, that's very important to consider. With these two worlds merging, I think both have a lot to learn from one another, right? Traditional finance can embrace the new technology, the speed of settlement, the automated compliance, and DeFi can embrace the knowledge that has accrued over centuries of traditional financial practices and really kind of temper some of that move fast and break things ethos that has thus far defined the industry. And I'm curious as well, because we're on the subject of talking about maybe more Web3 and DeFi focused topics here, Edwin, would love to get your opinion. We have had DeFi summer, as we remember, the big NFT boom that went along with it. And now we're seeing this wave of RWA and tokenization momentum kick up. Looking ahead, as we're in maybe the midst of, or some may say the latter part, some may say the early part of the next Bitcoin / on-chain financial cycle. Two questions. How do you see RWAs leading this cycle? And then how do you see Bricken's role within that cycle that we maybe find ourselves in currently?
Yeah, you trigger something that I've been not studying because it's not like I look, but I've been taking a look into it, and it's kind of like the DeFi, and some people call it like the DeFi Renaissance. Like, what is the new era for DeFi? Because it was, 2021 was huge. The yielding process that you could get was just absolutely ridiculous, and we haven't seen that again. I think it's the maturity of the state. So for me, kind of like the next evolution of DeFi is targeting not just digital assets, kind of like what happened with the Luna and all of that. Kind of like it was pure code against code, but backed assets. So this is kind of like the TradFi entering, because whatever traditional finance is usually either collateralized by an asset or use an asset or creating something that has tangible value. So that's kind of like the traditional finance. And in DeFi, we're starting to see kind of like RWAs being collateralized and used against, or stable coins using assets and whatnot. So I think the next big evolution of DeFi, and I'm talking to some DeFi protocols on how they see in it, they're like trying to get that and sort of stratify themselves because they see that the being back, the value, even the custody being used or the valuations, kind of like real tangible assets, for them is less risky and they can provide yielding on top. So I think the next evolution of DeFi, it's a conversion with real world assets used on these kind of like DeFi rails that have been beautiful built over the last 4 years. And I think we're going to start seeing a lot of the merge. And some people are already coming out with the new work, kind of like RWA And I was like, guys, stop making fights for everything or new words. Just call it DeFi or TradFi, but don't need to call it RWA Fi. It's like, I don't know, but that's kind of like just a joke. But yeah, I think the conversion is about to happen on RWA real world assets using DeFi protocols because that's going to be a very interesting sector. And I strongly believe that's going to get us closer to traditional finance because the traditional finance will understand that the same thing they do on their world can be done in ours with the blockchain technology.
Absolutely. I love the fact that what you hit on there, the idea that TradFi can continue existing business practices, but enhance them using the technology. It's not coming up with an entirely new way to do things per se. While there may be new processes therein, they get to retain the efficiencies that they already have and enhance them. And I got to say, Edwin, from your lips to God's ears, man, if we don't stop making up random acronyms in our industry, I worry we're never going to get the TradFi. I tell my friends, I'm like, I'm working in on-chain finance. I could explain that. But if I lead with, oh, I'm doing RWA. Oh, risk-weighted assets. Oh no, it's called real-world assets as opposed to fake world assets. What does that mean? And that always it's not starting the
Yeah, exactly.
conversation off on the right
Yeah,
foot.
if it's not real, it's fake. Is that what you guys do in crypto? Fake world asset? Like, yeah, exactly. I had the same conversation with someone. It's like, yeah, you're right. Why would you call it real world asset? But
Exactly. And then you open up Uniswap and say, no, it's very real. Look at the transaction volume. And the question is, does that have a unicorn on it? What is going on? So absolutely. We want to make sure that we can converge in terms of the messaging points, which is so crucial. And I got to say, Edwin, the work you all are doing at Brickken is phenomenal. It's very exciting to see the maturation of these ecosystems, and this has been a phenomenal conversation. I know for myself, we've spoken, a number of times, and I'm very familiar with what you're doing at Brickken. But I feel like every time we have a conversation, I learn more about asset tokenization, which is always just such a pleasure. So thank you so much for your time today. And I have to say, for everyone who's listening and ready to go deeper, what's the best way to get involved? Where can we find you? Where should we follow Brickken? And how can we learn more about the phenomenal work you're doing for asset tokenization?
yeah, thank you very much for that. And yeah, so happy to everybody to follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn, where I post a lot on RWA. But if you would really want to know way more, Bricken at Bricken or on the website newsletter, our marketing is doing a phenomenal work because we've been educating for so long that now we just optimize how much we're throwing into the market because that's what we want people to understand what we do. So we took us a lot hardcore, but now we're just moving all along the RWA sector. So you want to learn more about tokenization RWA, then please, I strongly suggest to follow Brick.
Absolutely. If knowledge is power, then and Brickken has some powerful messaging. Definitely recommend for everyone to check out the amazing work that Edwin and the entire Brickken team are doing. So with that said, Edwin, thank you so much, my friend. Always a pleasure conversing with you. This has been the RWA Pod. I've been your host, Ray Buckton. I urge you all to check out the RWA Vault, where you can have one deposit of USDC and start earning from a world. That's 10 or more RWA tokens, including the BKN token. Bricken's native token. With that said, we will see you all on the internet and next time for a phenomenal conversation. Trucks up.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.